Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Mourning Brew, with me, your host, Lee Petcher. Be advised that this podcast deals with issues of the passing of a loved one and the dealing with grief. So if these issues are upsetting to you at the moment, please come back to us when you feel ready to do so. Remember, you are not on your own. Otherwise, pour yourself a brew, get comfy, and we'll begin. Hello and welcome back to the Mourning Brew. This is episode 9. And before we get started, I just want to check in with all my listeners, as I always do, and just ask, how are you? Again, just take 5-10 seconds just to check in with yourself and just see how you're feeling today. The news is constantly full of COVID and people dying. The amount of deaths I've seen recently is untrue. I was scrolling through Facebook the other day and 2 notifications on the bounce were of people losing loved ones. And not 5 minutes before I came on to record this podcast, I got a message from 2 of my cousins saying that they're sorry to inform me that my auntie Carol, her husband, passed away last night. So sending all my love and thoughts and prayers to my Smith family. And always, I'm here if you need to chat. I'm here if there's anything I can do. Moving swiftly on to this week's episode, I am so thankful to have another guest on. Now, when I started doing the Mourning Brew, this guy was the top of the list to have on as a guest. He has gone through so much grief. And not only has he gone through it on his side of the family, he's gone through it on my side too. He is my brother from another mother, my best friend, and just all-round good guy and best man. I've got to mention that he will be my best man at my wedding. Jonathan Masterson, welcome to the Mourning Brew.
Thanks for the introduction. Full Sunday name as well.
Full Sunday name. We're going to call you Johnny from now on because that's how we know him. I must mention this to my listeners before we do continue. Johnny knows me as Pete. He met me at a time in my life where I was Pete. So if he calls me Pete, he's talking to me. Johnny, how are you?
I'm not too bad. I've had a bit of an up and down last 48 hours, but yeah. I'm getting there now. Looking forward to this and looking forward to helping people.
What are you doing? Like you said, you've had a rough couple, 48 hours. What are you doing in yourself to make sure that you're feeling better?
Just trying not to let things affect me that I can't control at the end of the day.
Exactly. I say that to everybody. Only focus on the things that you can control and there's no need to worry about anything. And I know that's so much easier said than done. But when you worry and you're just wasting time, if there's something you can do about it, stop worrying, do it. If there's nothing you can do about it, stop worrying because there's nothing you can do about it. Just let things play on. So, Johnny, the reason I wanted you on the Mourning Brew is because you've been there since, well, for as long as I can remember, really. You've been my best friend since we were knee-high to a beanpole, do you know what I mean? But you've been there as like a brother. And I mean that in all ways. Like people say, oh, he's my brother, she's my sister, and they're just really good friends. But I think the bond that we have goes a little bit deeper because of the things that we've experienced together. Now, you lost your mum at a very young age.
I was 15.
I still remember sitting in that church. You, Sammy and Shelley on the front row wearing your Bulls tops with mum one on the back. And I remember the day I got that call. I remember running over to the park where all my friends were at the time and just breaking down in tears. And I think from there onwards, our bond has just got stronger and stronger. I was there for you when you lost your mum. You were there for me when I lost my dad, my mum, my grandma, and my granddad. So your journey through grief has been tremendous, through to the point of last year when you lost your auntie as well. This isn't an episode that I want to rush that conversation. I mean, I can see I know the listeners can't see this because it is just an audio-based platform, but behind Johnny is a picture of his mum, Denise. You've even got your mum tattooed on your arm, and this is something that I want to dedicate a full episode to. I think it deserves that respect. But for now, I'm just going to carry on with my journey through to the end. We had Emma on last week, and she was telling me what it was like for a partner to support a partner going through grief. I want to know kind of your experiences as my best friend, as my brother from another mother, your experiences and also what you did to help me. And I know that's a big umbrella, but that's going to be like the things that we're going to encompass in this chat. The first thing I wanted to say is that I was chatting to Emma, and I think you and obviously Sammy and Shelley are the only friends, and I may be wrong. Please, people who are listening to this, if you want to come back at me with this and challenge me, please do. But out of my friends, you're the only ones who met and had a relationship with both my mum and dad whilst they were alive.
I'm trying to think back if there's anybody else that we grew up with around the time.
I don't think there is. No one that I'm close to anymore. I mean, there are people on Facebook who I chat to every now and again.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's anybody who is still a massive part of my life who knew my mum and dad. The reason I bring this up is because Shelley messaged me after listening to the podcast I did with Emma, and she gave me a lovely reply saying that she'd listened. Thank you so much for listening, Shelley. Thank you to everyone who's listening. I really do appreciate each and every one of you taking time out to spend this time with us. But she also reached out and said there was a time where she thought my dad didn't like her, and we were in a pub. I think it might have been the Salt On. It may even have been the Market Tavern, but there was a band playing. And you and Shelley had this argument, and you'd gone off, and my dad bought her a lemonade and said that she was awesome. It's like, I love that. What are your memories of my dad?
Wow, I've got loads of memories of your dad. One memory that'll always stick out in my mind of your dad is when we were in the living room at Albert Terrace, and we were just sat listening to music, and he came in, and he'd been over at the Salt On. He'd had a couple of beers. He'd been with his friends. He wasn't drunk, but he wasn't sober. He was a little bit fresh, a little bit merry.
Yeah.
And he got the guitar out and he started jamming, and it was just, I'll never ever forget that. It was one memory that stands out for me as until I'm grey and old. And I'll just never forget how. I mean, I started to try and learn the guitar and failed miserably. It really confused me. But I'll never forget how effortlessly he played and how much it was so easy to him. And it was like he was in another, although he was there present with us in that room, it was like he was on another planet. He was absolutely in his element. And I will always remember that. That is one thing that will always stand out to me regarding your dad. I mean, there's other times as well. I openly remember the time that we were going out for a meal in a limousine and with a couple of girls. And I'll always remember him in the living room taking photos with us, having a laugh, taking the mickey out of us, basically.
Yeah. For the listeners, I'll post that photo in my Instagram. Go follow me at the Mourning Brew on Instagram, and I will post that photo of me, you, and my dad. My God, I was big back then.
My hair. I can't get past that.
Good
shirt.
The shirt. My shirt as well. I think my shirt was 3 sizes too big to try and hide the belly. And my hair was so long, it was down to my shoulders.
God.
For those who won't know, I was brought up in a little village called Oakenshaw. Now, Johnny was brought up in a village called Wibsey, which isn't miles apart. I think it's about 1.5 miles, if that. And I went to Wibsey Middle School, which is where I met Johnny. But my dad grew up in Buttershaw, which is an estate just on the outsides of Wibsey. So my dad was known all over this kind of area. When we were old enough to go into pubs, when we weren't old enough to go into pubs, but we still did, everybody knew my dad, right? Everybody in Wibsey seemed to know my dad. How weird was that?
Yeah, especially when we go into like the windmill or the tavern or even the club, and people just come up to you and go, "You're Bobby Petcher's son," and it like, "What? Who are you?" And yeah, it was surreal. It was like he was a local celebrity,
right?
It was as though everybody knew Bobby Petcher and everybody knew family. And obviously, you've already touched briefly on how close we are. You know, I looked at your dad just like my own dad. He was there for me like a son. And, you know, the amount of people that used to come and talk to you because you were Bobby's son, you know, it was so random. I'll never forget when we were in the pubs and it was like, he knows me because of Bobby. And it's like, you know, especially as you've already said, when we weren't even old enough to be in the pubs, you know, as a young kid at like 15, 16, somebody knowing you because of your dad, it was surreal. It was really, really strange.
I'll never forget the times at Wibsey Working Men's Club where it was a members only club. And because everyone knew me because of my dad, I could just walk in. And then because you were with me, straight to these snooker tables. And that's where we'd spend most of our time.
Yeah, definitely.
How was my relationship with my dad in your eyes?
Well, it was difficult, mate. I mean, you've obviously had the father-son relationship, which, as any father and son will know, has a lot of ups and a lot of downs. And there were the very good times where we were all very happy. But I think it's very important to stress to people, especially the listeners, that there are unhappy times in a father-son relationship. And, I remember, sometimes when, things weren't so great. I remember, you being upset. I remember you being grounded and jumping out your bedroom window to come and see us. And, I remember all sorts of things like that. I remember when it got to a point where your dad came home one day from the pub upset, drunk, and you was upset and, you got into trouble. And, it's tough. There's ups and downs of life. And I think it's important that everybody knows that, relationships, they are always rosy. They are always the happier that we want to be. Although they're very happy memories for them, there are downs as well as ups.
So when you think back of the relationship that you had with my dad, but also the relationship that I had with my dad, do you remember my dad in a positive manner, or do those negatives creep in?
If I was being completely honest, I wouldn't say the negatives don't creep in. But on the whole, I remember your father is a very positive person in a positive manner. I mean, yes, there will be the blemishes of times when I remember you being upset because of rows that you'd had with your dad. But I would never let those negative moments outweigh the positive, because there was far many more positive moments than negative.
Yeah, that's true. How was your relationship with my mum?
As strong as a mother-son bond can be, mate. I'll never forget when my mum passed away, and I know we'll touch on that briefly, largely even in another podcast, but I'll never forget the days very shortly after she passed. And she passed on the Monday, and I think the Tuesday night, not even the Monday night, I stayed at yours, and I don't think I left yours until the following Wednesday. And that was because the funeral was on the Thursday. Yeah. I think for those 9 nights that were there after my mum passed, your mum was there for me like a mother was there for a son. And I'll never forget the fact of her coming up to me. I'll never forget the fact of her hugging me. I'll never forget her putting her arms around me and telling me that she was there for me, and that was Jonnie's son. And I'll never, ever forget those times where, especially so close after losing my mum, and I know she wasn't ever trying to replace my mum, but she was there to tell me that I had another mother figure in my life, and that she would always be there for me as a mother. And I'll never forget just how welcoming she was, how open she was, how I was already a part of the family. But as you've already said, Pete, we were close from middle school, which, when we were in middle school was year 5, which is around 9 years of age. And then losing my mum at 15 had already been a part of your household for a good 6 years. But more so in them times of my loss with my mum, just the whole way she integrated me into your family almost.
Definitely.
Which is why, I think the bond that we have is like you said earlier in the podcast, that it is deeper than a friendship. It is more than just a standard friendship. And, I think a large part of why we are so close is down to your mum. Yeah. I know your dad always welcomed me very much as his own. And I know he always took me under his wing and looked after me as a father would look after as a son. But I think your mum even went that extra 10% and that extra mile. And she was a significant part of my life.
Yeah, she had this amazing ability just to take anybody under her wing, but it's the fact that she called you Jonnie's son. Yeah. As if, like, from the Karate Kid and Daniel's son, you were Jonnie's son. And whenever I'd go and visit my mum, all her friends would be like, "Oh, this is Lee. How's Jonnie's son doing?" It wasn't just Lee. It was Lee and Jonnie, always Lee and Jonnie. And she was so proud of you, so proud. And she'd constantly talk about Chloe when she was younger, Alfie when he was younger, Evie. And I could see just so much pride welling up within her. I've said this on the podcast before, that it's my deepest regret, and a regret that I'm going to have to take with me to the grave, that I could never give my mum blood grandchildren. Obviously, she had grandchildren. She had Joe, she had Miles, all of them. But I always wanted her to have her own. But the way that she took in Chloe, Alfie and Evie as her own as well, it was unreal. Wonderful.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was like, and especially from Evie's perspective, because me and Evie's mum have both lost our mothers. Evie's never really had a proper grandma as such. I mean, she's got Sally's dad's wife as a nana, but she never really had a proper grandma. And I always remember Evie calling Petty, your mum, Grandma Petter, and I'll always remember that. And I remember when we went down to visit her, we were staying at a local caravan site, a Haven caravan site, not far from Louth, and we went for the day to visit your mum. And I'll never forget your mum on the motorised scooter, the mobility scooter, and Evie on the front, and she was and Evie's face was, I mean, Evie at the time would have been, 5 or 6?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget how proud both Evie and your mum were driving up and down the street to the little village hall and back again. It was absolutely fabulous. And Evie always talked about Grandma Pear. I remember after Chloe was born, I remember Petter holding, your mum holding Chloe. And I remember I just remember when she looked at her, and it was a magical feeling. And, your mum was amazing, mate. I'm not going to lie. She was, again, the way she made me feel as a kid and the way she looked at and treated them like they were her grandkids, mate. She was an incredible human being. And
she had this affliction, I'm going to call it, of whenever she'd see tat in shops that somebody would like, she had to buy it. I kid you not, I've got a wooden Spider-Man because I love Spider-Man. I've got a wooden Spider-Man that goes in the garden, sat on a bookcase over there, just because she saw it, she thought of me, so she had to buy it. Did my mum ever buy you or the kids anything like that?
Yeah, one thing she brought me was, it was like a teddy, and I've still got it today. It was a Paddington bear, and I love Paddington. I absolutely love it. I've still got that upstairs. But going back to the kids, more so recently, because it's fresher in my memory, when we went down to see your mum, I remember Evie, we was in the house, and Evie was thirsty, and your mum got her a drink. And obviously going through your mum's front room, for those that don't know, you pass the bedroom door to go into the kitchen.
Yeah. And
the bedroom door was open, and Evie saw the ginormous stack of teddies that your mum had. And she was like, oh, wow. And your mum was like, oh, do you like them, Evie? And Evie, being thirsty, she didn't get the drink for about an hour because she nicked about 40 of your mum's teddies. And I'll never forget driving back from your mum's to the caravan with literally the back seat filled with teddies in and around Evie, so much so I could barely see out of the rear view mirror because your mum had given Evie so many teddies, and she was, it was so funny.
Who needed to go to an arcade,
Well, yeah, exactly. Who needs an arcade? The hardest part was leaving the caravan site and going home. The luggage wouldn't go in the car.
It's funny you say that, because when I was cleaning out my mum's house, those 40 teddy bears appeared again from somewhere.
Yeah. I think I took another 5 for Evie when I helped you.
You did, yeah. My mum was a hoarder. She kept everything. Again, this is something that I've mentioned before. When I lived at Albert Terrace, how clean was that house?
Oh, unreal, mate. I remember that she used to always, on a Sunday morning, in the dining room where the table was, there was all the brass and there was all the ornaments. And I remember every Sunday she would clean them and then cook Sunday lunch.
Yeah, fresh as well. Not heating anything up. Everything was fresh.
Oh, yeah. From peeling the potatoes, peeling the carrots, to even doing her own roasties, to making the Yorkshire pudding mix with the flour.
How good were my mum's chips?
Oh, mate. Oh, some of the best chips I've ever tasted. They were absolutely out of this world.
I miss them chips.
Yeah, they were very good.
She wasn't prim and proper. She was down to earth. She was a little tomboy. Do you know what I mean? She didn't care what people thought about her as such. She just wanted to entertain, but she maintained a very, very clean house. And I think that was largely down for my dad. I think that's her way of showing that she loved my dad by keeping the place just spotless. And the reason I say that is because when they moved to Mablethorpe, before my dad passed, when they moved to the caravan and then from the caravan into the house, it was still spotless.
Yeah.
It wasn't until she moved to Louth did all that go by the wayside, and then she started hoarding things. But going back to my initial point, she was a hoarder and she kept everything. Like you said, when we were cleaning out the house, there was so much stuff that you took back, so much stuff that I took back just to keep of hers. I mean, you got the whole Harry Potter collection, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Give them to Evie, the DVDs. I remember having to hire a van to come down.
Yeah.
To help with all the big furniture. And,
I mean, you even got a bed.
yeah. So yeah, it was scary. I think that's one of the hardest things of her passing for me, seeing how much she were going through, not being able to be there as much as I'd have liked to have been. I think more so because of the fact of how much you were there for me when my mum passed, and I wanted to be there every single minute of every single day. And as I know, when with the podcast you touched on briefly with Emma, it was a good 2-hour drive and even longer for Emma. And obviously I was there as much as I could be, mate. And going back to my point, I think one of the hardest things I remember is not only you having to go through what you went through from the moment you rung me on New Year's Day when you found out, but then not being able to see your mum for so long, going 3 or 4 days at a time without me or Emma there. And then to the fact that not only that, but within 4 weeks, you had to completely clear your mum's house as well. I can't begin to imagine how difficult that must have been for you. And I always remember them times that I came down to just, and again, not physically, but be almost like your punch bag and just let the steam out. And
I mean, this is a nice segue onto that. What was going through your head during those times? The fact that you couldn't be there for me and how close you were to my mum. Because for you, it must have hit just as hard, if not a little bit harder, because that's like a second mum now. So what was going on for you during that month?
Well, quite a lot of emotions, mate, for me. I mean, it was almost like losing another mum. I'd lost many significant people who were mother figures in my life, being my mum and my grandma's, and then your mum as well. It was a hammer blow. And I was feeling really upset. I was feeling really hurt. I was feeling devastated that your mum had passed. And then I also felt ashamed that I couldn't be there for you. I couldn't be the brother that you needed. I couldn't be with you 24/7. I couldn't hold you every moment that you needed someone there. I felt angry that I couldn't be there as much as you needed me. I felt like I wanted to be there more. I wanted to do more. I wanted to do everything I possibly could to take your pain away.
But you did everything humanly possible that you could do at that point.
But I still felt it wasn't enough.
But it was more than enough. And we're going to touch on this point just a little bit later down the line, but the amount of help and support you gave me when my dad passed, that more than suffices for the stuff that, and it's not a competition. It's not, I did that for you when your mum passed, so you have to do that for me when my dad passes, and then it gets bigger every time. Do you know what I mean? It's not a competition. You can only do what you can do in that given circumstance. Do you know what I mean? You were married, you had a kid, you had to work, you had to provide for them. I needed you. I'm not going to lie and say that I didn't need you. I needed you. You were my best friend. Are my best friend. But you were there whenever I needed you to be there. You came down when you could come down. There's a few times you came down. You didn't just come down the once and that was it. You came down at least 2-3 times. Those 3 times that you came down, I can't imagine that was easy for you.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't easy at all, mate. The one thing I remember is coming down to your mum's house and your mum not being there. That was the hardest part of everything, that we lived so far from your mum and we didn't get to see her as much as we'd liked. And then we were down here and she wasn't there. And the first time I came, I don't think I fully processed what had happened. It was almost, I was travelling down to see you, but I expected your mum to be there and she wasn't.
Yeah.
And that hit like 1,000 knives. It hurt like hell. And then I didn't want to let you see that because I wanted to be strong for you. I wanted to be the person that was like your big brother, that was a comfort for you, that I was there to welcome you into my arms and protect you from what was going on around you.
But who was comforting you in that time? Because sure as shit, it wasn't me. I've not made that connection until I was speaking now that it was like you lost a second mum. And only in my head now, I'm going, holy fuck, I should have been there for him just as much as he was there for me. And I was so selfish. But at that time, you kind of need to be.
You do. You've got to be selfish. And for anybody listening and everyone listening, being selfish at this time is very important because you have to. People deal with it in different ways. I get that completely, but you've got to look after number one in those times because it's so tough. And I think that's the thing, Pete. I don't think it mattered that you weren't there for me. I had to be there for you. And although I was hurting a lot. I think it kind of comforted me knowing that I was there for you. I think it comforted me that knowing I was helping you, which in return subconsciously helped me.
But did you have any external people, I'm guessing your wife at the time and the kids, because they knew my mum as well, Sammy, Shelley. Did any of your family and other friends come around you at that point?
Yeah, I had people around me who were close to home. My ex-wife, at the time, she was a massive help. She'd obviously been through losing her mum, me losing my mum, so she understood how I was feeling. She gave me comfort when I needed it, space when I needed it, and that helped massively. There was also the time I had friends around me, close friends who live in and around where I am, who were there for me, supporting me. So yeah, it was, I did have element support. My two sisters and my dad, who have been there for me forever and a day, have always been an immense support. And luckily that I have that network around me, which is why obviously when I came to you, it was not about me. It was all about me being there for you. And like I say, I think that subconsciously helped me as well, which again, I've never really kind of thought about that until I said it out loud. But I suppose it helped me helping you, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It takes your mind off the event that's happening by being busy and by giving yourself fully to someone else. They say that the highest frequency a human being can be on is that of giving, of being of service to someone else. So you hear these people who give and give and give, and yet their own lives just become better and better and better because it's so much more fulfilling in life to give whatever that is. And it doesn't just mean monetary things. It's not superficial. It doesn't mean give away your stuff. It's not sell your TV so you can give somebody who's starving a lot of money. It's just give your everything about you, give your being to that person and help them as much as you can. And that's just going to fill you up and reward you so much more down the line.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the one thing that you can give anybody is time. I think that is the most important thing you could give anybody.
It's the greatest commodity we have. It's something that you're never going to get back.
100%.
I could give somebody £100, the last £100 in my account, and it seems like a big deal because it's the last £100 I have. But I know a few days down the line, I can get that £100 back. If I give you an hour of my time, I am not getting that back.
No, and that's much more valuable than any £100.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not just giving your time. It's about being present with the time that you're giving.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not just being there and then being on your phone or being distracted by this, that, and the other. It's just giving your full attention, your full love and support to the person who needs it at that point.
And I think that's, another thing, Pete, that I look back to when your mum passed, and I couldn't give you as much of my time as I would have liked to. But the time that I give you, I made sure that when we were together, I helped you in terms of to try and take your mind off things. I've certainly helped you in terms of cleaning your mum's house and getting things together. So that wasn't as much of a burden for you as potentially it could have been. Every second that I was there with you, I wanted to make count. And I'd like to think that I did that in the best possible way I could.
Oh, you definitely did. Like you said, you came down 3 times. I thought you were there a lot longer than you were. So, and that's the power of giving your time and your attention to someone is it just magnifies it.
Yeah. I think it feels more, Pete, because the last time I was there was for a number of days. It was 3 or 4 days that I was there. It wasn't just come down, in the afternoon, stay overnight and then go the next day. I think it was a prolonged period. I know I got the van. We got the house as empty as we could. Your mum's funeral was within that time frame as well. And from arriving, I think it was the Sunday afternoon and I left the Wednesday, we made sure that we was happy as we can be in that time. Made sure that we took minds off things. Made sure that we got the business side of things done. Yeah. But also equally took a bit of a self-time out, a bit of time for ourselves, which
we did.
Anyone grieving needs to do.
Yeah. It can't just be business all the time because it is going to catch up to you. And this point in my life, particularly because I was up against a deadline, I had to force myself to do that business side, but allow downtime as well. Whereas with my dad, I didn't allow any downtime. It was just full on. And then it caught up to me a lot later down the line. It sounds to me like this thing of you not being there enough is still an issue for you. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of, mate, because, again, I know we'll talk about it at a later date, but the amount of time that you were there for me with my mum, and I felt as though I wasn't there enough for you. Although I did everything I could when I was there, I felt the volume of time I should have been there should have been more.
But it's like we were saying at the top of this episode, you can only do what you can do. So I want you to go away from the end of this recording going, do you know what? I gave everything I could to Pete at that time. There was nothing else physically I could have done. Unless you think deep down there was. Was there something more that you think you could have done?
I don't think there's anything more I could have done physically in terms of the work-life schedule that I had at the time. And, I was there as much as physically possible that I could have been.
Mm-hmm.
I just, in my heart of hearts, I would have liked to have said, actually, I don't need to work. I can leave work and I can spend all 4 weeks with you and I can do everything I need to. I know that's not a reality and I know that's not even humanly possible. However, it still doesn't stop me wanting to be that brother that you were for me.
I think, again, totally different time periods, mate. We were 15 when your mum passed.
Yeah, we were.
You didn't have a wife and children to support. You didn't have bills to pay. So I could be there every day and not miss anything. We went to the same school. Like, there was no reason for us not to spend that time together. It wasn't a 2-hour drive in winter. So unless there is something physically that you're holding back on going, do you know what? There was a time I wanted to call him, but I didn't because football was on. Or, do you know what? I could have gone down then. I just chose not to because I had a beer. And I'm not saying that's what you did. I'm just saying, unless that is an actual thing, there's nothing more you could have done. So I want you to be at peace with that and go, I did everything.
I suppose I've never looked at it from that angle in terms of the fact that it was a 2-hour drive, it was winter, it was that much distance. I've never kind of looked at it from that aspect. I always did look at it from the aspect of, I want to be there more, I want to be there more, I want to be there more. And like you say, you break it down and there was probably never a time I could have been there more than what I was.
You physically couldn't have done anything more than you actually did. So I think it's time you forgive yourself for that. And just remember that the support that you gave doesn't end once my mum's ashes were scattered.
No.
You're carrying on giving me support and you will continue to do so until one of us pops our clogs. You phone me up every anniversary of my mum and my dad. You phone me up on the birthdays. You phone me up on Christmas. You phone me up on my birthday. When we're chatting and you see me go down, you ask me about it. You come around to the house and we get pictures out and we talk about it. Your support doesn't end there. No. It continues through. So as much as you may have wanted to be there more then, you're there for me now as well. Do you know what I mean? And if I had the choice, I'd rather have you there for the rest of my life than just there for that one period.
I'll always be there for you. You know that.
No.
Until I can't physically be there anymore, or vice versa. But, at the end of the day, the bond that we share, mate, I think it's even more important than a family member because you kind of get your family chosen for you. You choose your friends and to not only choose a friend as good as you and as lovely as you, but to be welcomed into your family as part of your family and the things that we've been through in our lives together. Like you just said then about, I'll call you on, your mum's anniversary or your dad's anniversary or the birthdays or your birthday or Christmas and things like that. We call each other, multiple times a week as well, just checking in with each other and in terms of lockdown and in terms of what's going on with each other in the week. And the bond that we share is incredible, mate. And your mum and your dad are a massive part of why we are so close. And
yeah, exactly.
I suppose I can kind of take a back step and kind of, like you said earlier, forgive myself a little bit because until actually sat here now openly talking about the level of what I did for you when your mum passed and what we'll talk about what I did for you when your dad passed as well shortly, I think I never kind of took the time to say that I did all I could, even though I wanted to do more. I don't think I've ever appreciated the fact that I physically couldn't have done any more.
It's like this year, you wanted to be here for me on the anniversary of my mum and the anniversary of my dad. But because of the times that we're in lockdown again, you physically couldn't. And you don't beat yourself up about that because law dictates that you can't be there. So the same thing with my mum's death. You were there when you physically could have been. So just count it as another lockdown, mate. You're absolutely fine. I know you were there as much as you physically could have been. And I appreciate all the times that you were there and every time that you picked up the phone just to check if I was all right.
Good, because that kind of gives me a sense of, I don't know, underwhelming gratitude that I just, appreciation. It's making me well up. Yeah, nice. Thank you.
It's very nice to be appreciated, and I appreciate you every day of my life.
Vice versa. Ditto.
What I want to know is, were there any secret conversations going on between you and Emma when my mum passed?
25 a day, probably.
Yeah. See, I wasn't into any of this.
There was multiple conversations between me and Emma. I'd message Emma and ask her how you were, and I'll always remember speaking to Emma when we were together down at the house with you at your mum's, and yeah, we had conversations. I'd ask how you were today behind your back, because I didn't want to ask you face to face and bring up something again. And it's like you said when you spoke to Emma on the podcast, sometimes it's nice to ask that question, but equally from my perspective, I don't want to bring up something that you might have discussed 10 minutes ago with Emma while I wasn't there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't want you having multiple conversations regarding the same thing at a time where sometimes you don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. I think during that initial period, going to someone who's close to me to get that information is really good advice. So if someone's going through something and their partner's there, go to the partner. But as time goes on, you don't feel like that anymore. You know, you can come to me and just ask me outright. I said there's a small group of people that I don't mind opening up to. So if you want to ask, you just ask.
100%, mate. I think it was more the times that I spoke to Emma first was more the times where we were together down there, because Emma would always get there before me. I think if I remember rightly, Emma always travelled up on the Friday after work,
Yeah.
and stayed the Friday night, whereas I come down the Saturday morning. So Emma would always have been there for a little bit longer than me. Mm-hmm. And I think every time I came down, I would ask Emma first how you are, just to make sure that I weren't duplicating anything that Emma would have already done. And you having to have any unnecessary conversations or duplication of conversations that would potentially upset you. I would never speak to Emma during the week. If I wanted to speak to you, I would always pick up the phone and ring you and ask how you are, because I knew that Emma wasn't there with you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you never spoke to Emma while she was at home?
Oh, probably would have done at times, asking how you are and asking how she was. I probably would have done. I mean, it is a couple of years ago now, I can't remember exactly, but no. I'd imagine there would have been times I would have asked Emma how she was, and I would have asked Emma how you are when she wasn't with you. But I think the large majority of the times that I would have asked Emma how you are is face-to-face when she would have been there with you the 12 hours previously before I was there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We've talked a lot about how you've helped me with my dad. They were in Mablethorpe. I got the call on Monday evening after a rehearsal. Me and Russell got in the car and drove down Tuesday. What happened from there on your side? Because you did a lot for me when my dad passed. And I think this is going to be very, very beneficial to other people wanting to know the technical side of what to do when a loved one passes.
Well, I think it was because of kind of the job that I did at the time. I mean,
which was?
I was a moment banker for a bank, and basically what that entails is dealing with people's finances. And me and you obviously worked together at the time. Obviously, you had to leave work, and I knew where we worked together. We had customers who facilitated that kind of thing. And I remember your dad passing in Mablethorpe, and I remember having a chat with you the next day about how it was going to be Bradford where the funeral was.
Yeah.
At which point I said to you, do you want me to speak to somebody? Because I know both yourself and your mum were very upset. Mm-hmm. At the bank where we worked, there was a customer who run a funeral home.
Yeah.
And I spoke to the gentleman and had a chat with him on your behalf and explained the situation and where you found yourself. And I'll always remember from speaking to him to getting the details of, not only what the funeral entailed, but from the funeral home picking your dad up and bringing him back to Bradford. I remember putting him in touch with you. Mm-hmm. And then obviously, even from when at the weekend when I came down to Mablethorpe and was with you and your mum, even to ringing companies such as Sky and things like that. And, there is the side of grief, but there's also, like you say, the practical side that things need to be done on the back of stuff like that. And me helping you do those things and it being something that I could help with while you could help your mum took a weight off her shoulders that she didn't need to be worrying about.
Yeah, exactly. You put us in touch with this guy who, like you said, ran his own funeral home. when my mum passed, we went with a corporation funeral home. And the differences are chalk and cheese. The guy that you put us in touch with, this is something I didn't know, and I don't think many of the listeners will know either. If you pass away in one town, if you want to have the funeral in a different town, you have to pay some kind of fee or tax for every town that dead body passes. So from Mablethorpe back up to Bradford, again, it's a good 2-hour drive. There's so many different areas we would have had to pay to get my dad's body from A to point B. So that was just going to stack up on the funeral bills. But this guy was like, I can get that done for you for now. He knew what to do. Whereas if we'd have gone with this massive corporation, they would have charged us that and tax on top.
Oh, undoubtedly. And I think, well, I hate to think actually of how much that would have cost. I really would.
He worked out for us at the time, and I've completely forgotten. Well, obviously, it's 12 years ago, but it came up to at least half of the funeral itself. Do you know what I mean? It's like the funeral and that on top.
At which point he would have been entitled to probably charge that, but he didn't. And I think you're very right in what you say about chalk and cheese in terms of family-run businesses alongside corporations. And that's not knocking corporations, by the way.
No.
I just think there's a more personal element. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's the right thing.
No, I know exactly what you mean. I think depending on what it is that you're doing, for you, you have to make that choice of whether you want to go family or corporation. Now, if I'm investing a lot of money, I want to go corporation. Do you know what I mean? I trust that big corporation to do what's right. When it's dealing with a loved one, especially something like a funeral, I want somebody who's going to give me that family touch. Someone who's gone, mate, I go through this on a daily basis. I'm going to sit with you and give you all the information you need and let you digest it on your own time, and I will always be here. Rather than, right, you've got 10 minutes to have an interview with us now and we'll get everything sorted.
Yeah, definitely.
But it wasn't just the funeral thing that you put in place for us. You got us flowers and you sorted all that as well.
Yeah, again, it's just knowing people, and I know a lot of people. So, I do know a florist. We knew the funeral home, and it was just, again, trying to take away minor details that you guys didn't need to be worrying about, but equally needed taking care of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. It's all about network. I think life in general is about networking. And like you're saying here, it's just knowing these people who might be able to give you a little bit of a discount or point you in the right direction. And I think where we're at the moment with social media, everyone's become a lot less social. We're not going out and we're not having these conversations with these people who might be able to help us down the line. I mean, yeah, we've got things like LinkedIn so we can connect to these people, but again, you're linking into them on a corporate level. If you were to walk into the family, the family florist just down the road, and you built up a connection with them now, you go in every Valentine's Day to buy flowers, you go in every anniversary to buy flowers for your loved ones or whatever. When something like this happens, because you've been so loyal to them, they're going to go, do you know what? We'll sort you out.
Yeah. And I think, like you say, I think that comes down to maintaining those friendships and relationships, which is massive, mate. And I'm quite fortunate that I could call on a few favours, and not only to help financially, but to help ease the burden of the fact that, again, it's not something that you guys, I say, needed to worry about. Obviously, it needed taking care of, but I wanted to, again, do everything in my power to do as much as I could so that you didn't have to.
So you worked in a bank. You're a personal banker.
Yeah.
You still work in a bank. You know finances quite a lot. You're my go-to guy now if there's something that I need help with. For anybody listening, can you give some financial advice? It doesn't have to be like corporate advice. It doesn't have to be from the bank that you work at. This is just independent advice from you. Can you give our listeners any advice as to things that they need to consider when someone passes? For example, how they go about sorting cancellations of services such as Sky. What happens to credit card debt when that person dies? Just the financial side of it.
Yeah, I think as much as we hate to talk about the financial side of someone passing is quite important.
Oh, death is a business. Death is a big business. And I learned that when my mum passed.
Yeah, 100%, mate. And I've done it a couple of times for my family in recent years where I've sorted finances out, and it's just ringing companies and speaking on their behalf. I mean, the ones that will always come to mind is, things like bank accounts. You need to speak to the banks, credit cards, things like that. You need to speak to the council. You need to speak to energy companies, utility companies and things like that. There's obviously DVLA and passport offices to notify and things like that. I think the one big thing that you've got to be aware of when someone passes is again, it's not an easy thing to do. It's hard to do it straight away. I'm not going to lie. Very hard to do it. However, the sooner it is done, the easier things become. I'll never forget going back to speaking to somebody about her losing her husband and the fact that she never got round to notifying a company that he passed away. And 4 times a year, she would get a letter addressed to him that broke her. And she could never, ever pick up the phone to ring that company to stop it because she was scared of having that conversation. So me on her behalf did that. And I'll never forget, it was probably around 4 or 5 months after we'd had the conversation and she'd not received a letter. And she came in and she sat down and she spoke to me and she said, I can't thank you enough for what you did that day because now I don't have to get upset 4 times a year. Yeah. And if there's one thing that I or anybody could do for anybody and their loved ones in terms of taking away any kind of hurt, then just be kind. Just do anything you can because it helps so much.
In a world where you can be anything, just be kind.
Absolutely. Amen.
So in terms of like banks then, for example, if someone wants to close down a loved one's account or especially like credit cards, what happens to that debt?
It's difficult with a credit card debt. Different companies can have different guidelines. So I wouldn't want to go giving anyone any wrong advice or anything like that and saying, well, Johnny said on that podcast that this happened. There are different companies and different guidelines. So one thing I would always recommend if people struggling with finances is getting in touch with Martin Lewis and looking at their website. He is absolutely amazing. And the website on there provides massive, massive help and step-by-step guidelines as to how to deal with certain things. Notifying banks is a bit easier. I find when you speak to a bank, they relatively have specific teams to deal with bereavements. So you will always find, or I'd like to think, certainly in my experiences, I've found that speaking to people, they treat you very sympathetically. They show the right levels of empathy. They are very understanding and they take great time in listening to what you need to do. And I think they take great steps in concentration in getting it right first time. If anyone wants any advice and any help and any support, I'm more than happy to help wherever possible in that terms.
Do you want to drop out your contact details here, your Twitter it's Twitter that you're on at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, my Twitter is at JohnnyM1984. My email address is Jonnie_Masterson@hotmail.co.uk.
I will make sure they go in the show notes below this, guys. So if you want to check that out, just please do get in touch.
And as I said, I'm more than happy to help any of the listeners in any way that I can do.
Have you got any advice for people like yourself who are friends of someone grieving?
Be there as much as you can be. Support as much as you can be. Again, treat others as you'd like to be treated yourself. Empathy, sympathy. Don't be too over the top. Don't be there all the time unless that's what the person wants. Be sensitive of their needs.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm going to throw you on the spot here, Johnny, a little bit. Can you remember the poem that you read out at my mum's funeral?
Yeah, I can. Do you want me to read it?
Yes, please.
We're gathered here today to celebrate Petta's life, a lady who'd help anyone, a loving mum and wife. Growing up at Albert Terrace with you and Bob and Pete before you moved to Lincolnshire, where you'd quickly found your feet, which was always going to be easy for someone as friendly as you. Truly wonderful individual, one of a select few. Coming down to see you, Jake raiding your biscuit tin, spending time reminiscing, taking Nevy on the scooter for a spin. You loved us all very much, just like we were your own. And now you are no longer here, I can't help but feel alone. Your funny jokes, your welcoming smile, that quality family time that made the long drive so worthwhile. So now my words are coming to an end. I'd like to thank everyone who's come to pay our respects to an amazing lady. Rest in peace, Petta. Love, your Johnny son.
And that was Jonnie Masterson. I'm sure that you can all agree that what he says just rings true. In a time where you can be anything, just be kind, just be human. So that's what we all are at the end of the day. Yes, we all have our different sexes, we all have our different religions, we all have our different beliefs, but at the very core of it, we're human. So if you see someone struggling with anything, just offer a helping hand because you don't know what good that can do. I saw a quote on Facebook where it says, you can't change the world, but one act of kindness can change the world for that one person. So please go out there, be safe, be kind. And if you need to get in touch with me, I am at The Mourning Brew on Twitter and at The Mourning Brew on Instagram, or themourningbrew@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening. This has been The Mourning Brew, putting you in the centre of your morning.